From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight. An important show. We're talking about a new program to fight human trafficking in Tennessee. We'll talk about how big a problem it is. We'll define exactly what it is and get into details about this new program. I'm working on a story that involves the Department of Children's Services. Unfortunately, many of the missing teens that they're actually looking for have been in DCS custody. We'll also talk about that. But we're happy to have with us Margie Quin. She is the CEO of In Slavery Tennessee, joining us via Zoom. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Ben. It's always great to be with you.
You've been on many times, and I'm glad you're there on Zoom, and we appreciate it. And, of course, encourage people to call in. But let me just start with, let's define human trafficking and how big it is in Tennessee.
Yeah, that's always the best place to start, because I think there's still a lot of folks that don't understand exactly what trafficking is. And our state law defined it in 2007. As when a person is over the age of 18 and engages in a commercial sex act by means of force, fraud, or coercion, that is human trafficking. So you have a person over 18, you have a commercial sex act, and the government can prove force, fraud, or coercion. Now, if a person is under the age of 18, a commercial sex act occurs, period. The government doesn't need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. They are sort of a victim per se, if you will. Now, some people say, well, what is a commercial sex act? And the code further defines a commercial sex act as a sex act that occurs when something of value is exchanged. And so value can be money, it can be drugs, it can be guns, it can be shelter, it can be food. So anything in exchange, anything of value in exchange for sex makes it a commercial sex act. And so I would throw this little caveat in as well, that our state statute says that if you purchase someone under the age of 18, if you purchase a sex act from someone under the age of 18, you are a trafficker. And so you see the TBI running all these sting operations and arresting men, I think 13 from Hendersonville a couple of weeks ago, for coming to pay to have sex with a kid. That is because under the statute, when you do that knowingly, you are a trafficker.
And that is, I think, what is also confusing for some who have followed the news for a while. That used to just be called prostitution. They used to be charged with soliciting prostitution, right? And now it's human trafficking, which sounds bigger, and it is, I guess, bigger in a way.
Right. Because in 2011, the General Assembly decriminalized prostitution for minors. It doesn't mean they made prostitution legal. What it meant was law enforcement was no longer going to be charging kids, 13-year-olds, with prostitution. It's a crime they can't legally engage in to begin with, as the age of consent in the state of Tennessee is 18. So it was great that we started that way, and we clearly defined that the kids that get lured into this or forced into this are victims of human trafficking, not prostitutes. If it's an adult and they're buying an adult, a buyer would have to know that it was under duress, that in other words, that there was force, fraud, or coercion involved. Otherwise, that is the crime of patronizing prostitution.
And one other thing before we delve into more, a pimp, somebody who has a lot of women who work for him and he gets paid by them, would he be a human trafficker? Would he be charged for human trafficking?
It depends on whether the government could prove force, fraud, or coercion, or that he was trafficking a minor. If he was doing certain things with a minor, then that is trafficking. If he is forcing an adult, if he's controlling an adult's access to illegal narcotics, that is specifically laid out in the statute. All of those things are deemed to be coercive and could lead to a trafficking charge.
And so what are we seeing? Are we seeing more of this? There seems to be a great deal of focus on it. And yeah, you just mentioned arrests recently in Sumner County, a whole bunch of people arrested, and several big busts here lately. Are we seeing more of this kind of activity? Are we taking it more seriously? Kind of where do we stand with the activity now?
Know that we see it increasing. but we certainly are not seeing it decreasing. And so there's all the sting operations, Metro PD's new human trafficking unit, all I think are helping us educate the public as to the scope of the problem. It's hard to try to address it either through policy or resources if we don't understand the scope of the problem. And so I think these sting operations and the new focus by the TBI is going to lead us to be able to identify the scope of the issue here in the state of Tennessee.
You are with End Slavery Tennessee. You used to be with the TBI, right?
Right. I'm retired from TBI.
Yeah, you've been on this show with the TBI talking about this issue, and now you're with End Slavery Tennessee. Tell us just a bit about what is End Slavery Tennessee.
Yeah, so we are a direct service nonprofit. We deliver resources and services, therapeutic, trauma responsive, evidence-based curriculum to both adults and children who've been trafficked in Middle Tennessee. So my agency covers the 41 counties in Middle Tennessee, and we are what's called the sort of first point of contact. So we're the ones that get the calls from law enforcement in the middle of the night or on the weekends, hospitals, who identify a trafficking victim. We're the ones who come out and pick this person up and take them to safe housing and then offer them resources. Some of the women that we interact with were trafficked into the state of Tennessee, and so we might house them and work with them for days or a couple of weeks, and then facilitate their return to their home state if that's what they choose to do, with maybe a soft handoff to a like organization. But the kinds of things that we're offering survivors are free housing, stable housing, therapy, group therapy, workforce development, and some of the things that they need to address medically, dental. Women and boys who come out of trafficking typically have a fair amount of medical needs that have been unaddressed. Many times they come out malnourished. Almost 100% are homeless. 68% or so are opioid addicted. And about 80% have involvement in the criminal justice system. And so there's a lot of services that we can offer those folks. But the most important thing probably is that no matter where they are, we're going to meet them where they are. We're going to meet their needs, whatever those are. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. We try to tailor a program and delivery of services based on what that survivor needs at that time.
So how many people are we talking about? So if you've tracked it, how many people did you help 2 years ago, last year? What are the numbers we're talking about?
Yeah, so in 2019, we received about 310 referrals for service. The COVID year, we received about 150. And last year was about 250. So we're starting to climb back up. Over 50% of our clients are under the age of 24, and about 40% are under the age of 18. And so we're not housing juveniles at this time, but we're working with the Department of Children's Services. We're working with other facilities who are housing juveniles and delivering services to them either in the community or in the facility in which they're housed.
40% are under the age of 18. Mm-hmm. So what is the typical story of that subset? I mean, that's a big group there. So 40% are under the age of 18. They're kids. Mm-hmm. How did they get there typically?
So, and I think it's important to know that, so the National Center for Missing and Exploited Kids tells us, based on all the data that they've collected for years across the country, the average age of entry into trafficking is somewhere between 12 and 14. The average age of a juvenile trafficking victim is 15, and that tracks with what we see statistically in our agency. The youngest referrals we've seen just this year are 10 and 6. And so
10 and 6, that's insane. All right, well, go ahead, I'm sorry. My next question is going to be, how in the world did that happen? But I guess now I'm asking the other. Go ahead.
So when it begins that early, it's typically, it's almost always familial. And so you've got a family member trafficking that child, a parent or a step parent, a guardian. There's typically drug use disorder in the home. And so if you have a child sex trafficking victim and you don't intervene with that child, if you don't deliver pretty intensive services, it's most likely you're going to have an adult sex trafficking victim. If that trauma goes unmitigated, untreated, unresolved, then it's going to lead to sort of bigger and better stuff later on. And it almost always leads to deeper and deeper involvement in the criminal justice system, which is why I think agencies like in Slavery, Tennessee are so important to support the efforts of DCS, to support the efforts of law enforcement, and to participate in a collaborative way within the community to serve this victim population.
And what do you generally see? This is fascinating. This is good information here. I mean, is it typically one person, like a big operation, one person with lots of people that person is trafficking? Or is it what you just said with like the 6 and 10-year-old, one family, which sounds just terrible, trafficking, 2 young kids? Is it lots of small operations, or is it typically several big operations? What is it?
It's all the above. So there's everything you can imagine in the state of Tennessee, and it's not just our state. It's not that we're special. This is happening all over the country in every state. You have multinational operations. You have a trafficker with 2, 3, 4, 5 women. You have a single parent trafficking their child, typically to raise money to purchase drugs. And we see it all. And with regards to like how does this happen or where does this come from? When I was with the TBI, we did a series of reports and research. And in 2014, we released a piece of research called The Geography of Trafficking in the State. And what we looked at were the 25 counties in the state that were reporting the highest numbers of juvenile sex trafficking victims. And we started to look at what the similarities were in those counties that might give rise to an issue like human trafficking. And so, is it poverty? Is it socioeconomic? Is it education levels? Is it registered sex offenders? In other words, is there a demand for children in that particular area? And when you look at something like poverty, Lake County, for instance, which is in the northwest tip of the state, reported 16 to 25 cases of juvenile sex trafficking in a 24-month period between 2009 and 2010. There are only 7,800 residents in Lake County, and so they have a higher per capita instance of human trafficking than, say, Shelby County does, which is incredible. So what's going on in that county that would put a child on that kind of trajectory? And immediately the numbers on poverty stood out. So about 46% of the kids in Lake County are living below the poverty level, which is more than twice the national average. And so poverty doesn't cause trafficking, but it certainly can play a role in a trafficking situation.
You said 40% are under the age of 18. How many are in DCS custody? How many of these kids maybe are runaways from a foster home, or how many are in DCS custody?
Almost 100% are either in custody or receiving DCS services. And again, I'm going to go back to the National Center, and the data that they tell us is 1 in 6 children who are being trafficked have been either in the social welfare system, the child welfare system, or are currently in the child welfare system. And the reason is because children who are typically in DCS custody are in an unstable situation, and they lack the sort of safety net that a family would provide, kind of that would underpin a childhood experience. And so when you have that lack of safety net and the tumultuousness that probably has led to a child being placed in custody, you really have a recipe for terrible things to happen. It doesn't always happen, but certainly the components are in place for something like that to happen. It's not DCS's fault. They're trying to fix what was broken. A lot of the stuff that leads a child to end up in DCS custody, it was certainly not the makings of our Department of Children's Services.
Right. Wow. All right. A fascinating sort of, that sets the table for our discussion. Now there's a new program, pilot program that we're going to talk about, Operation Safe and Sound. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. And if you want to call in with any question, thoughts, comments, there's the number, 615-737+, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.